CRF still does well. Topic model does much better. Why does topic model do much better? By the way, this is for the IR world. It does much better because the vocabulary is much better. Why? Because the vocabulary it knows. You gave it to it. It was from the drug label. And the others do okay. How do they compare? Well, it was an easier problem. CRF still did well, but the trends for the most stuff did it the same, except for topic models, which is much better because it knows vocabulary. We also did it on Twitter. That answers your question on Twitter. And we did the same evaluation, and then what you see here is, again, CRF does much better, and the topic model does okay. And it does okay because the vocabulary is such. It doesn't do as great as it does because there are too many ADRs detected, and the vocabulary of the ADRs are similar. If you think about a drug label, every drug will kill you. Cardinal rule. If you look at the last thing, it says the last side effect is going to be death. So, it didn't work as well. So, why did we do this? For hypotheses. We don't believe anything that you're going to get from social media is proof. Hypotheses is this drug potentially causing this ADR? And there's something called MedWatch that lists the FDA, that lists what are the side effects and what are the problems. And the whole goal is to be able to tell you there may be a drug here that is, quote unquote, causing a side effect. Now it's called an adverse side effect, right? Adverse drug reaction, adverse being negative. Are all reactions negative? How many of you own stock in Pfizer? You know it's the #1 drug Pfizer has? It's a heart medication. Oh, wait a minute, it's not a heart medication. Yeah, it is a heart medication. You know what the name of the heart medication was called? Viagra. Viagra was a medication meant to treat heart conditions. During testing, they found out it had some other effects. That's why it's the #1 selling drug they have. So some effects aren't necessarily adverse per se, but then it's not. Then it's called off-label use. You name it in the vocabulary. And of course, here's some publications. Quickly, what can we do else with social media? Well, we can tag things. All of you know about YouTubes and all the other tagging of a device? No problem. How do you tag things? Well, you tag them sequentially and it goes on. Is it always working? How many of you search some of these tags? Sometimes they don't quite work. And the reason they don't quite work is because they're noisy. And sometimes they're noisy because they have typos. And sometimes they're noisy because people type them that way. Hip-hop, and hip-hop, those three different variants, are all hip-hop. But they don't match. So our goal was to be able to help people find the right tags and the right mapping. So you would take Happy Days as misspelled and suggest Happy Days, spelled correctly, or hip-hop and suggest the more popular version. So when you're entering your label, you'll do much better. And how did we do it? Well, as you're entering data, you're going to add information to it. So as you do, you're going to label your items, and you're going to suggest to the person, hey, your tag isn't the right tag. Maybe you want a different tag. And how are you going to do that? Well, this is kind of small, but you can kind of gist what it is. What you're looking here is you're looking to add the label Britney. B-R-I-T-T-N-Y. It isn't either of the Britneys that are out there. There are two Britneys. One is Britney Spears, B-R-I-T-N-E-Y, and she's a singer, or so they claim. No comment on her singing. And she has songs, and it's pop songs, and she's in videos, and so on and so forth. There's another Britney, Britney Murphy. She's an actress, again, so they claim. And she was in a movie. She was a very good actress in that movie. She was in Happy Feet. You know what Happy Feet is? It's an animated version of penguins. And she sang there too. And the question is, which Britney did you want? And the answer is, I don't know. But I can correlate these via a bunch of metrics, and I can suggest for you which one you might want. You might want the Britney, B-R-I-T-T-N-Y, because that is the new Britney, so we'll add it to it. Or you might want one of the ones that you really meant, which is the other two, And we can do many different metrics to evaluate it, and we can actually do it on various video sets and see if these suggestions will work. Well, we did. And here's a bunch of results. What you need to take out of it is we did a lot of testing, because academics like lots of testing, so there's lots of testing. So we could publish it. But in reality, it works okay. When a whole bunch of different data sets, 85% of the time we got it right, and 75% of the time we also managed to suggest it for things that should have been suggested. So we did okay. It's an interactive tool, you can try it out. It was done with a group of people in Italy. How many of you have been to Italy? It's a great place to visit. So I'm always happy to work with them. And these are the people, and those are the paper. And finally, I want to show you something completely different. I want to show you that people integrate things with collectively. How do they integrate things collectively? They actually have a goal of giving you answers instead of links. They actually give you something. This has nothing to do with the web. Instead of giving you a set of links for responses, they give you a set of answers to your responses. Your natural language queries give you natural language answers. And the way you do it is you take a search, you find where you're searching, you parse your query, you check if you've already answered it. If you answered it, you return the results. If you didn't, you dispatch it to a whole bunch of sources, structured, unstructured, and so on and so forth. You get the result, you aggregate it, you give it to the cache, and you answer the person. So what's collective about this? What's intelligent about this? This, lots of different people curated lots of different data in lots of different ways, never in the same way conveniently, but you do. And you can ask your queries on it, and we did it for the museum. And here's a set of queries that you answered, and it gave you the query, it gave you the result. This is an integrated result in the question, who was Aunt Frank? And these answers are correct. You could also do it integrated via CAMS, and this answer is also correct. So why am I including this? Is this old or new? Well, let's start from the beginning. How many of you have, oh, see, I don't have that anymore. That's the 4. I have a 5. How many of you have the iPhone 4 or 5 and use Siri on a daily basis? By the way, if you say, where's the ITE building on University of Maryland campus, and you ask Siri, not going to give you the right answer, trust me. I tried. But it was introduced on October 11th, October in 2011, so certainly not new then. Actually, what I describe as a project we did in 2000. We filed a patent for it in 2001, after we had some initial results, and it issued in 2005 after dual reviews. That was owned by the school. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of people doing that nowadays. When I was saying it's a lot of people doing it nowadays, I found out from the school sold it, and IBM bought it. I said, IBM doesn't buy patents. IBM's the largest producer of patents. They don't buy patents. Certainly not these kind of patents. Why would they buy it? They have their own. So, what do you do when you don't know? You ask the collective intelligence. If you learn anything from this talk, ask what's out there. So we did. So first thing I found out is that the IBM Watson won Jeopardy. That was actually interesting. That I knew. I watched it. It was very, how many of you have seen Jeopardy? Very interesting. I also saw that IBM was actually going to do something about it. They actually had formed an advocacy group for healthcare. Note the date. March 2012. Purchased a little later. I'm like, that can't explain it. But that did. At least according to the blogs that said, why would they buy this patent? Because I wasn't the only one that thought it was nuts. IBM Watson finally graduates medical school, October 2012. Now, I'm not saying that that's the reason, but that's what the blogs say, that it is the reason. So, what did I talk about? I talked about surveillance and hopefully shedding some positive light on it. I showed you the vocabulary, how to deal with vocabulary, how to detect adverse drug reactions. I whizzed through the 2 things I told you I'm going to give you only 2 minutes on. I only gave you 2 minutes on. And I'm now summarizing that. But there's something that I learned over the years. there are 3 rules that I absolutely, positively follow in any talk I give. 1, if you're scheduled for an hour, never go beyond an hour. I started at exactly 12:06. It's now 1:02. 2, always leave room for questions. You have to leave room for questions. Because if you don't leave room for questions, you're going to look like the person that were afraid to answer the questions because you don't know what you really are doing, and therefore you look bad. So you always have to leave room for questions. So, rule number 1 is always finish on time. I've got exactly 3 more minutes. Rule number 2 is always leave room for questions. I've got 3 more minutes. But there is one more, far more important rule. And rule number 3 is never leave much time for questions. Because if you do, they will actually ask the questions you don't know anything about, and rule number 2 is going to be violated. You're going to look terrible. So, I started at 1:06. According to my watch, I started at 1:05. According to that, it was 1:06. I've covered exactly 57 minutes. If I keep on talking long enough, I'll cover 58 minutes. And I'll leave 2 minutes for questions. So, are there any questions? Go ahead.
So I had 2 questions. First on the Twitter. First of all, my name is Eric Corbett. I'm a master's in human-centered computing. I was wondering if there was any study on how people feel about revealing their medical data via social media. I feel like there might be there are probably certain medical conditions that are people are going to be more apt to put on a social media, but I think that I can imagine that there are others that people might not want to reveal. So how might that affect the system? And then my second question is, does that study now prove that we can use Wikipedia in our own research to cite? And I'm saying this in front of all the professors. So we can
to cite?
Yes, as a legitimate information source.
It's mostly correct. Legitimate or not, I would verify everything. But generally, what's in Wikipedia is generally correct, and I do use it. And I do cite with it. You state the date, and people take it or leave it, as they say. Answer about your medical conditions and what people post. First of all, there's 2 different types of answers to that. I told this to the students that I talked to earlier today. When you're asked a question, I do a lot of work with lawyers. When you're asked a question, the lawyer teach you something about answering them. First of all, if you don't want to answer the question or cannot answer the question, then don't say I'm not going to answer the question, because then you look bad. So then answer the question that you do want to answer or that you can answer. So let me answer that one for you. The bottom line is that people talk on health, almost everyone looks on health conditions on the web. It's the #1 source for people. And in fact, most people, quote unquote, try to self-diagnose them, and they generally get it wrong. But they look on the web. As far as posting their conditions, there's a whole lot of forums, like Force, or like breastcancer.org, or like Patients Like Me, that basically are predominantly targeted towards the people talking about their conditions as a comfort group, or as an indication, or as an information source. And on Twitter, people post everything. Is it necessarily, am I going to be able to detect pancreatic cancer? Probably not on Twitter. Am I going to be able to detect something that's occurring frequently? On Twitter, probably. What is the level of noise, signal-to-noise ratio that we need on Twitter? It's hard to tell. That is why we generate hypotheses. We say, this may be, or this may be, and we use actually many different trending algorithms, and they all show spikes. The common spikes occur in all, but there's some secondary noise in others. So there is medical information out there, and there has been done and has been detected some adverse effects via social media. So I can't tell you that it's going to really work. I can tell you that what it does, what we believe and we advocate, is it's a signal, it's a source. The FDA is so overloaded with trying to detect ADRs. They are so overswamped that they are begging for these kind of tools. In fact, we're working with the FDA on these kind of things as we speak. Sure, go ahead. Why don't you call it? I'll go around the room. Go ahead. By the way, you guys realize there's food out there.
Yes.
And I did not drag you long. That was you guys dragging. Go ahead.
So for the detecting outbreaks, how fine-grained do you expect to be able to get? Because I think the general understanding is during certain periods, like the winter when it's colder, people are more exposed, you have higher rate of certain kinds of diseases across the board. But then there are many things which, like, if someone comes in and says, I've got a cough, I've got a mild fever, and I ache a little bit, that could be dozens of things in a period when you're already seeing. So do you expect to see large spikes that merely indicate a lot of things could be going on, or more fine-grained detection of certain specific things?
Let me answer that with the answer of both. The reason I say that, first of all, what I didn't describe is one of the things you do with Twitter is you geocode it. Another thing you do it is time of day. There's another indication. Or season. Or day of week. There's a whole lot of filtering on the tweets that you do to kind of geographic better and to be able to predict a more localized environment. There's also another thing that you do. There's health map that's done by John Brownstein, which we also talked to, at Harvard, that small school in Boston. And what they do is they do health map, they put conditions. So you can take conditions that are known, you can track them on Twitter as another indication. If you spike something from Twitter, for example, or from a post, you go and see, is it something already known? Is it, or some diseases are occurring? Maybe you want to validate it that way. So there's no question that if it's rare, you're not going to get it. It's all a question of resources and how much do you want to do. I can set the threshold very low, in which case I spike with a lot of false positives. How do we filter those out? Well, we've got a bunch of trending algorithms and they spike differently, unless it really is true. So like on the flus, it spiked correctly. On some of the off ones, some found it, some didn't. So what happened was you filter it that way. It's like the voting scheme. If 3 of the 5 things you do indicate a trend, then maybe. But it's all a question of how fine-tuned you do. So no, I don't think I'm going to find something exceptionally rare, but if it's exceptionally rare, I don't care to find it. That's not some of the thing I'm doing. I will find it on the blog posts. And that's why I actually care about the blog posts, because that's for ADR, that you'll find much more. Tim. Advantage that I know him for many years. I won't say how many.
How you can identify beliefs that are very popular but almost surely false, like vaccinations cause autism, or the CIA was behind the K.S.H.S.
We do generate false entities. We are working on being able to, quote unquote, I've mentioned Don Brownstein for them. Ours is medical focused. We are mapping onto various different known fallacies. We are generating some conditions, but I'll be the first to admit it. The reason I stated repeatedly that we are hypothesis driven, i.e. that we generate hypotheses as opposed to trying to prove something, is that I don't believe that we can actually automate the proof sufficient based on the techniques we're doing. So even with the filtering techniques that we try, even with the additional sources that we use, we're still generating some false negatives, some false positives. Yes?
So given these trends that you're seeing, do you think they'll get to a time where you can actually like separate these results by maybe like demographics, like age or socioeconomic status or like race of people? Because I know, like, for example, hypothetically speaking, maybe black people are less likely to have skin cancer because of melanin in their skin. So are there things where you can see that these are the things that we're seeing, and we're seeing that these people have these conditions more than other people?
In fact, it's the real goal of the ADR work. The problem is that the average population, the average patient doesn't exist. And it's well known that certain ethnic backgrounds have got certain diseases. Jews have got certain diseases, European Jews, and so on and so forth. The House of Windsor has its own set of conditions, and this because same reason, they marry within themselves. So there are a lot of these things that we look for that particular reason. There is work at identifying demographics along the way to correlate this, because quite honestly, this country is very demographically oriented. The average, you can pick certain area zip codes that you know is a certain likelihood of a certain population, or a certain financial status, or a certain behavior. I didn't talk about it, but I did work with Northwestern early on. In fact, Northwestern is dealing with it, where zip code could help detect what likely bacteria a woman got in recurrent urinary tract infection, and we improved the treatment of urinary tract infection by about 1.5%. Now you say, who cares? 1.5%, it's not even worth publishing. Except there's 8 million patient visits on recurrent urinary tract infections each year. And if you improve the average suffering a woman has from a urinary tract infection that goes untreated, before it gets treated, it's 3 days. So if we improve it by 1.5%, roughly speaking, that's 1,000 person years of less suffering a year, if you really believe these statistics. So the notion of this is it's because you do such poor, because there is no average patient, and drugs are released in the market after roughly 2,000 patients, 3,000 patients said it's okay, you need these kinds of things. And yes, demographics are being used for it. Yes?
Like, did you find out some kind of relation that those who are experiencing the things are probably, like, you're getting more correct prediction from the tweets?
I didn't follow, say that again.
Did you get, like, better knowledge or prediction from the tweets for which people are experiencing themselves?
We did not, so you're asking us, could we identify the people on the tweets?
No, I'm asking whether, like, things that people are experiencing themselves, those tweets are, like, more correctly, like, more correct information can be obtained from those tweets.
We don't know who the people are that are tweeting. We don't know what conditions they're tweeting. We did have grammar rules to avoid things like problematic statements like, I am not suffering from fever. I do not have a flu, I do not have a cough, I do not have a sore throat, which are out there. And he had a sore throat, right? So when you try to match ADRs or he had restless legs, if I'm talking about I'm taking drug X and he suffered from restless legs, doesn't mean I'm suffering from restless legs. So a lot of the parsing tried to deal with it, but we don't know exactly who does what. I can't answer that.
I have a question about your, the first topic that you said that, okay, you track the trends of the disease or something like this in the Twitter.
We didn't track, we basically saw it spiked and said it's tracking. I wasn't looking for a condition. I saw something spiked and said that's what's spiking.
No, I mean that, for example, if you go to for example, a pharmacy, all of the pharmacies in the United States, and get a statistic about the drugs and medicines, so you can track it in that way too.
That's what the FDA is trying to do. The problem is that it takes a huge amount of human effort. It's a lot of false diagnosis. There's a lot of false records. But that is a way that they're doing it. This is nothing that I said here today is meant to replace what is actually being done. I have been very cautious in all this work to state that we're generating hypotheses that you should pay attention to. If this one approach says this is a condition, and another approach says same condition, a third approach, it is giving the FDA a guideline of what they should prioritize to pay attention to. That's what they want to use it. If you get from this talk that that's the thing to do, then it's the wrong message. You should never rely on fact from social media. You should rely on it as a source, as another information source, and as a very real-time information source that can give you something to dig in deeper to.
Because you know that some of the information says that the allergy, I think it is completely clear that it happens in the spring, and we see that it happens in April or May. You know, it seems like there is no...
Some of it is true.
Yeah.
We detected other things, but yeah, no question about it. We're going to detect things that you already know, and we're hoping to provide free surveillance to detect something you don't know. And indeed, ADRs is one of them, yes.
Well, I was curious, the graph you showed us showed that...
Which graph?
The first graph with the surveillance where you were doing the flu detection, you were actually consistent with, I think it was CDC.
Yes.
Were there any cases that you were able to do that early detection, define some outbreak, and
Notify the CDC?
yeah, and how much time lapse was there?
So, as you know, Twitter went IPO. We're trying to work with them, there's some discussion. The only way we can do it real time is to really utilize real systems. We don't have the systems, we don't have the data. We use backwards data. And the problem is that also we are academics. My students kind of want to finish, graduate. Not that they're ready to do so, but they kind of want to. And because of that, in order to validate something, you have to look at back. I mean, I could show that what we did worked because I knew what really happened. If I tell you right now this is spiking, you don't know if it really is or is not. Our goal is to hopefully run it live in real time and work to be able to detect some of these conditions. And that's actually why we actually interacted with the FDA on exactly that. But that's more on drugs as opposed to flus.
So we all know there's reception.
I was not the one that caused it today.
Yeah, thank Dr. Ryder for the exciting talk and sharing the presentation tips with us. So let's give it another reception, and you can continue the conversation with us.